This is my interpersonal communication project slideshow. In this project, I will be taking you on my developmental journey in developing my interpersonal communication skills. My name is Alicia Gwynn, and I'm enrolled in the summer HSER 508 course. My overarching goal for my life is to become a better listener. After completing the behavior blend exercise, I found that my results indicated that in the category of this is expected of me, I was an SI personality type, was somewhat surprised that I was as transparent as a survey indicated. People do expect me to be inspiring. However, I'm not quite sure about how I feel about being submissive. Another area that caused me to do some reflection was the fact others seem to see me as a perfect people person. When I read this section, it reminded me of an incident when my mother insisted that I go outside to play with the other children when I really wanted to stay inside with my Barbie. The "this is me" results revealed CIS personality type for me. This personality tends to be more passive than active. The characteristics in this personality type tend to feel more like me, but again, I'm not quite sure. I have found that this book on understanding personality patterns will help me to discover my real personality. Next, according to Stewart, communication is a continuous, complex, collaborative process of verbal and nonverbal meaning making. While I was reading this, I began to identify with the implications that talked about how cultural and communication intertwine. When society is confronted with a person who is not in the norm, they tend to question their intellect and their background. Being an ineffective communicator can have a negative impact on relationships, especially in a supervisory or counseling role. I have been in both. I am trying to learn to communicate better with my staff, my husband, and my students. Next, how my behavior blend has influenced my conversation. This reading helped me to discover some techniques that I can use with regards to strengthening my interpersonal communication skills. I am finally admitting to myself that I was developing things and inspiring other women, doing what was expected of me without finding myself first. This was so prominent within me, I actually developed a workshop series entitled A Bare Woman. In Ephesians, Satan tries to bombard. In Ephesians 12, John 8:44, Satan tries to defeat us with strategy and deceit through well-laid plans and deliberate deception. Satan tries to bombard our minds to defeat us by using a cleverly devised pattern of little nagging thoughts, suspicions, fears, wonderings, reasoning, and theories. Reflecting this week drew me to remind myself of this as I begin to wonder why I've doubted myself lately. As I continue to reflect on the readings this week, I try to focus on the strongholds that are keeping me from finding my true personality. In 2 Corinthians 10:4 and 5, the Bible speaks about strongholds as being areas in which we are held in bondage due to a certain way of thinking. I believe that these readings are helping me overcome my strongholds. How to deal with these barriers. John 8:31-32, Mark 4:24 tells us that we must get the knowledge of God's truth in us. As I begin to reflect on my listening assessment exercise in Burley and Allen, what got me to thinking was the fact that I always thought that the speaker was totally responsible for the success of communication and that an effective listener keeps an open mind. After taking this exercise assessment, I realized that most people know the things that we should do as speakers, but we don't often practice what we preach. The reception, attention outlined in chapter 3 by Burley and Allen is something that I begin to focus on as I begin to develop the delivery of my presentations. I try to make sure my delivery allowed the listener to receive my information through 5 senses. This has been so evident when I work with young people. I became very sensitive to my choice of words, especially since I work with a lot of minority students. I became acutely aware of whom everyday words provoked a different feelings or ideas in the multicultural audience that was in front of me. Listening to myself, am I an effective communicator? When I was reading about the styles of listening, I became a little overwhelmed when I actually observed students who displayed these characteristics in my class. The faker, the dependent listener, the interrupter, the conscious listener, and the intellectual or logical listener. I've continued to find that I almost have to perform when I'm presenting to my students. I do believe that being an effective communicator in a one-on-one or group setting depends on our ability to take into consideration the audience we are addressing and, whenever possible, adapt our presentation to meet their style of listening. Selecting what I identify most with, waiting to inhale. In Stewart's article on inhaling perception, 3 perception processes were outlined. The first one, which is selecting, was what I identify with most. Unfortunately, I'm often rushing, and the example provided in the reading was something I had just experienced over Memorial Weekend. The mental guidelines, or the cognitive schemata, are used in order to help us with the organization of incoming cues about behaviors and objects, etc. Personal prototypes and scripts are 2 ways we use generalization to represent certain types of people or behaviors. Next is Only Skin Deep. I really was moved by the article Is Only Skin Deep from Julia Woods. Woods explains this world describes communication that emphasizes one aspect of a person above all others. For many individuals from diverse backgrounds, we only see the color of their skin and not the abilities they have or their special uniqueness. She illustrated a perfect example that I often experience and hear about in my working with students. Filmmaker Spike Lee is quoted as saying, "I want to be known as a talented young filmmaker. That should be first. But the reality of today is that no matter how successful you are, you're still black. You're black first. This is still true today." The flat brain syndrome, 4 psychological things that occurs. In the readings by Peterson, I found myself really interested in understanding the flat brain syndrome. I could identify with the 4 psychological things that occur. The first one, which is described as a stomach overload, was very interesting to me. I can remember times when I was a young girl that my stomach was always upset. I didn't realize that I was carrying the lumps of hurt feelings and the feelings of inadequacy. As I allowed myself to remember my early childhood, which I have since suppressed, I was always plagued with stomach aches. I can remember always feeling awkward, uncomfortable, and off balance. Peterson describes that this occurs when our stomach containers expand beyond their normal sizes like tumors, gradually pressuring internal organs out of place. I remember praying to God to deliver me from this feeling, to make me strong, and to give me confidence. God answered my prayers. In the readings on the talker-listener process in Peterson, it reminds me of the times that I have said, "I know what I want, but I just can't say it." Peterson mentioned the 2 parts of talking which I am beginning to work on. The first part is that we need to determine what we think and feel. The second component is being able to share these thoughts and feelings in communication. The one thing that the reader states that I didn't think I had a problem with is that this definition assumes that we aren't always clear about what we think and feel and need to talk out loud to clarify. When I began to study the 3 communicating outlines by Peterson, which includes 3 parts, feeling, thinking, and an open ownership, I began to assess if I had been really doing this in my interactions with people. Sharing my thoughts, which is the second communicating outline, is something that I don't have any trouble with, especially in business. In business, I have operated where I have limit my feelings. The third area where I need the most work, the author identifies as head talk, is the one that really gets me in trouble. I am guilty of communicating with harsh edges that hint that my thoughts, which I do express without feelings, to come across as accusatory. I have enjoyed this class, and this is my interpersonal communication slide.